including at ISS, ESS, CSMC, and RESNA. Lois has been published in a variety of rehabilitation publications and is considered an expert in her field. Welcome, Lois.
All right, thank you. That was just so that I could drink some water and breathe, that the PowerPoint's on the screen now, so thanks for your patience. All right, good morning, everyone. Mark, come on up and join me. I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Good morning, my name is Mark Richter, and I'm the inventor of the Smartdrive, which is one of the power assists that we'll talk about today.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so the disclosure is, yes, Mark does represent, but as an engineer and a designer, we put together this talk so that we could really understand the different power assist technologies and how they're designed and how they work. So we'll get more into that as we go. So the agenda is to talk about design and differentiating product. And I say that word differentiation I think crosses all boards of what we recommend. We don't always evaluate. We evaluate the patient, yes, and then we also need to apply that evaluative process to the products that we are matching to those findings. And so understanding down to sometimes the details of how they operate, how they function, how the patient needs to be able to interface with them, I think changes and makes our evaluative process very specific. And that's how detailed we're going to get into today. So there won't be a general evaluation field to this for a seating mobility eval, but it'll be specific to recommending power add-on devices. There's a lot of expertise in the room. I'm glancing around and going, oh God, but no, I'm going to look forward to hearing from all of you and your experiences with this technology. So we'll look at that product application. We're going to look at the specific clinical assessment. We're going to talk a lot about the objective data that we need to acquire as part of the decision-making, the clinical decision-making about the product, and then how we're going to apply it to the funding and justification. So that is the agenda that we'll go through. For the objectives, it was to name 3 functional and physical evaluation criteria when assessing the patient's ability to safely use power technology, power assist technology, and state at least 3 clinical decision-making criteria when selecting the best power assist device for your patient. Name at least 3 objective measures to justify the need for power assist technology. And the 4th is to explain at least 2 different types of power assist technology and identify what types of users might benefit from them. I'll encourage you that we're going to show you and talk through 2 specific types today up front as part of this evaluation, and hopefully the exhibit hall, you'll still have an opportunity that there are other manufacturers and other design products that continue to, like we just heard from Stephen, the small guys begin to continue to innovate, and that helps us all with progressing our patient or our product recommendations and things that we have to offer the patients. So we'll take it from there, and Mark is going to speak for the next few slides, so I'm going to hand it over to him.
Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Yeah, you want to be my slide guy? Mm-hmm. My slide girl? That's fine, thanks. Which one is the right size? Oh, thanks. Okay, so there's 2 basic types of power assist. There's push rim activated power assist, and then there's motion-based power assist. So let's go over the push rim-based power assist. With a push rim-based power assist, you're using the push rims to activate motors, which then help you get around. Let's see here. Much easier to just demo it, but let's go through this real quick. Sorry. So can you guys see these chairs up here? Are they tall enough? I'll put them more towards the center. How about this? Does it work in the middle?
You can go down the middle aisle.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, we'll just do this as a live demo. Just a second, powering up.
Make sure you're clear about what you can say what product
Yeah.
it is as well.
Yeah, so push rim activated power assist, many of you probably are already familiar with this. The technology itself has been around for a long time, but basically I'm lightly pushing on the push rims, which activates motors, which then stay on for a small amount of time and then time out and come to a stop. This technology works both forward as well as in reverse. Let's see if I can pull that off. So it takes very little force to get, and if you haven't tried pushing on this carpet, it's really hard to do. So this is making it look extremely easy. In fact, I guess I can show you just how bad that is. I'll turn this off, and I'll make my way up to the front. So I'm working a little harder, probably harder than I wanted to today. So
I want to
carpet,
turn that mic off because I can hear your shortness of breath from all the way up here, actually.
and I'm a pretty good pusher, too. So the beauty of push-rim-based power assist is that it is amplifying each one of my pushes, and so I don't need a whole lot of strength to get around, especially in something that's as challenging as this carpet. Let's see here. There, you just saw my demo. But so fundamentally, this type of technology generally has two motors. So one corresponds to each of the two push rims. And there's different brands out there. So there's eMotion, which you guys might be familiar with, an Albert product. There is the Tailwind product. There's a representative from Tailwind in the back. They're out in the exhibit hall. Also the Quickie Extender, if you're familiar with that one, which is a Yamaha product. So all of those work off the same premise, which is you push on the push rims, it activates the motors, and you go. So the other type, oops, went the wrong way. So the other type is motion activated. So motion activated works off the premise that when you push on the push rims, your wheelchair goes, and instead of continually pushing, it will just basically create like a cruise control motion. So I'll just demo that one and then we'll talk about it. So in the case of motion-based, you basically create the motion with the, oh, sorry, gotta turn it on first. So with motion-based power assist, you make the first push yourself, and then the motor takes over and continues to drive you. So I guess how essentially it worked like a cruise control. So it matches the speed of your push, and it keeps going until you ask it to stop. And I'm not going to do this one without the motor going back.
Mark, I'm going to ask the audience, how many people are familiar with power assist technology? Okay. And how many people have used this type of system like the eMotion with the push rim? Okay. And how many people have seen and used something like the Smartdrive? Wow. I'm going to go now, and you guys can just, no. What's interesting is, Mark, I want you to be more specific between the design change that you just made for a particular reason, and then we'll talk about that, because that's going to affect how we look at coordination and strength and fine motor in the evaluation.
So fundamentally, as I mentioned before, the push rim activated power assist is really good if you don't have the strength to get that first push. Because when I did this demo, I had to push the first time myself, even in the thick carpet, to get it going. And if I wanted to go faster, I had to get it going faster myself. The motors didn't help me get there. So that's a huge differentiator between who's able to use this style of power assist versus this style of power assist. And then I guess there's fundamentally the technology is different. So because the motion-based power assist only uses one motor, it's a little bit lighter and more transportable than you'll find with the two motors. Obviously, each motor has its own battery, so that in and of itself creates weight. And so when you're getting in and out of the car, it's a factor. So how important it is for somebody to get in and out of the car themselves independently would be an important criteria. Mm-hmm. Let's see. What am I missing? I think we have pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so this is in types of technology, not product specific. So even though the Smartdrive is probably the only motion-based power assist right now, you can categorize them into sort of pros and cons, which both of them have. So it's open. So basically on push rim activated power assist, one of the pros is that you get power during the push. So as you're touching the rims, you're getting power. So somebody who's weaker can easily get it going. That's obviously a positive. Also, the push rim-based power assist does provide braking assist. So when they're going down a hill, it will slow them down. That's a positive. Very intuitive operation. I mean, It's no different fundamentally than pushing a normal manual chair. And then I guess some of the disadvantages, because the motors time out with each push, you do have to continually push. So if you're going to go a long stretch of distance, you're going to do a number of repetitive pushes, which while they're not hard pushes, it does fatigue someone over time to continually push on the rims. It takes a little getting used to, but because there's two motors, how evenly you push defines how straight you go. So it is a little bit difficult to kind of get yourself going straight. It just takes a little bit of practice because there's two motors. They are heavier, like I said before, because there's two motors and each motor needs a battery. You end up with a little bit more weight for transportability. And then oftentimes it does require some customization of the wheelchair to add this type of power assist on. So pros and cons of the motion-based power assist, in this case the Smartdrive. So it's a con, it's a negative, in that it only provides power assist after the first push. So the client has to perform the first push even in thick carpet, on a steep hill, anywhere. So they need to have the strength and capability to do that. Also, this technology, because of how it's configured, does not provide any braking assist. So the client has to be able to get themselves down any hill that they just got themselves up. Very important. And it's fundamental to this technology because of its configuration. Even if this little wheel in the back was locked up solid, it would just drag like an anchor. So it doesn't have any traction to slow things down. Really nothing can be done there. It is a relatively intuitive operation, but it does take, again, a little bit of training because it is unusual that you're doing this push and then cruising. But again, it's very much like braking downhill once you get going, so it's pretty normal. A pro for this technology is that it does not require the repetitive pushing, which is fatiguing over time. And I think that's probably one of its biggest advantages. Because it's one motor driving towards the rear, the middle rear, it pushes you straight. So there's no need to continually correct as you're going down the street. So it's nice that it drives straight on its own. This technology, again, it's one motor, one battery, so it is lighter weight than the other technology. And I guess lastly, it's a pro that it doesn't require much modification to your chair. So there's just some very simple plastic clamps that go on your chair, and this thing's ready to go. So pros and cons of both technologies. And it's fundamental to essentially number of motors. That's what it comes down to. Not so much brand. All right, hand it over. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I forgot to do that. I guess so those of you, I forgot, you guys have, a bunch of you actually are familiar with the Smartdrive. And what I have on today was a little bit different maybe than what you've seen before. So this is not a plug for Smartdrive, but just so you guys know there are changes. This is a new model that's coming out May 1st. And basically, instead of having a battery separate from the motor, it's joined into one component. So it's a little bit more easy to put on and off. And then in addition, there were switches that turned it on and off and used for indoor and outdoor mode. And those are now gone. And it gets replaced with a little Bluetooth wristband. So basically, some of the disadvantages of this, I guess I didn't mention before, of the model that everyone's familiar with, is that you had to reach out and touch the button to turn the motor off and then brake the chair, which required a fair amount of coordination. But with the new model, your hand becomes the button. So basically, if I want the motor to turn off, I just tap the push rim and the motor turns off. So I just go into brake normally. So I can brake lightly and it won't turn off, or I can tap the motor or tap the push rim and the motor turns off. So it's very, very, it's much more intuitive to use than it would have been before, actually. So your hand is now the button.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much.
Yep, thanks.
That was a perfect. I feel like it was important to set the tone. Obviously, the audience is extremely experienced, but when you plan the session, you don't know how much exposure people have had to this type of technology or even the upgrades. I personally built this PowerPoint and this talk based on the non-wristband version of this, and with some of those concerns about the fine motor coordination and response time that a patient might be able to react, especially also the positioning of those buttons. I just went through an evaluation a couple weeks ago in my own practice back in Philadelphia, and that was a huge challenge. And so had I known about that wristband, I think I might have, I might have to go back and reintroduce that to the patient, but that's okay. That's what innovation and these small, companies are doing. So we appreciate Mark's work, as well as Tailwind and Emotion and all the other companies that are starting to come out with. I saw a unit in the exhibit hall yesterday from Spin Life, a different sort of a full unit that you pull your manual wheelchair into, and then when you disengage, it's just the regular weight of the chair that you're pushing. And so again, it's going to be, and we're going to talk about this process of how we get through this. So we all know about assessment, obviously the fitting and the user training. And the only point I'll make with the user training is all of these devices to some degree require that, right? So is to take advantage of your wheelchair management and your training codes that are available to us, that each prescription doesn't have to be evaluation, fitting, delivery, oh my God, I have 45 minutes and I have to move on to my next patient because I'm being pushed for appointments, is that especially, if you're able to bring somebody back in, or depending on the environment in which you're treating them and they're living, is to do 3 to 5. I always write 3 to 5 that will be needed for follow-up, whether it's a manual chair, a power chair, for tilt recline training, and I can't, power assist obviously is going to take some of that as well. So consider that in the way that you manage the patient from the beginning of the eval process all the way through that continued follow-up. And I think that will help. So let's talk about clinical assessment. And it involves what I would call either clinical or critical problem solving. And I'll share with you that I was walking around this summer, and at just some show, and some guy was wearing a t-shirt, and I could only see the back, I could only see the back of him, but it said badass problem solver on the back. And I fought my way through the crowd, and I said, I need to know, what do you do? Who do you work for? And he was like an engineer. And I said, I said, we can adopt that shirt for us, because I think we're some pretty badass problem solvers out there to get these patients moving. But it does require looking at, the problem is a strong word, but this 4-column chart has been used for many years, so it's not exclusively to me, I didn't make it up, but it's identifying that problem. The problem is not just the patient's mobility, it's the family's mobility. It's that the family members, either partner or significant other, that is going to be going in the community, out in the community with them, and is that going to work for them as a family unit, or how will it be used? The goals of the patient specifically, the features that I mentioned earlier about the products that Mark just talked to you about, and how to synthesize through that, and then making that final product recommendation. So I put some things down, and there are a lot of people in the audience that I know have tremendous experience, and I saw all of your hands up. So add to my list if there's something that you think is missing. To me, and they're not in any particular order of importance, okay, so they're not ranked, but dynamic balance. I think about that right away being a little more specific than just your standard evaluation. Not that your push on a regular push rim isn't going to cause that forward displacement, sorry, I'm not used to saying in front of the thing, a forward displacement of your trunk and then almost a recovery. But I think about the added power, and if that person is able to really, from a trunk perspective, balance reactions respond to the energy that these technologies are giving that individual. I think about the sensation because of finding that button. It may become less of an issue with certain technologies. It may not, depending on if you're using a system that still requires you to really know how strongly you're touching that wheel and finding different on-off switches. The coordination of pushing and then stopping to reach for the button, making a reaction time within a certain quick time frame where you're not going to be able to stop in time. Again, along with that fine motor coordination. These are things that I think need to be specifically outlined in the letter, in your PTOT assessments, and then putting down to that level of detail as we start to justify, to show either that capability or, concern over those things, whether we think it's a good thing to do or not. Pain is something that I always do hear. I know Mark has used that quite a bit to try to justify that. I think we're going to need pain scales. I think we're going to need the level of medications that people are taking, and if that's something they were able to diminish over time. But getting that initial pain scale at best, worst, current level, what's a typical day, what's the worst part of the day that's hard for you, so that you can really help to use that for justification. And then, of course, upper extremity strength and range of motion. It's no different than any other evaluation. If you don't have the backup objective data to state, and the reviewers are gonna go and look for that when you make your claim that no other device will work for this person, they're gonna want that backup criteria. So Mark showed us unit assembly and disassembly, and think about how those things would affect someone. Even if someone was able to, in a sit transfer in the front of the car, are they able to lean down and disengage? And how are they going to get it into the car and then lean with their trunk balance to get it back out of the car? So all of those pieces have to be discussed as part of this evaluation. So how are they going to transfer it? What's the weight of it? What's the setup? What's the setup time? If they want to just go back to being self-propelling or not have the added weight on the unit, how will they manage that within their daily routine? Things like that. We just talked about, and Mark made a very good point that just came out of the other session, which was getting from point A to point B, how much energy do you have left? What can you do to minimize the energy expenditure? Not just the repetitive propulsion strokes, which we all know are important. We've had plenty of research and data over that over the years that we don't need to go into. You can go to the PVA papers. You can find that data if you'd like. And we did put some research articles at the end, and Mark is a great resource for that. So when you look at the environment, that's going to play. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Is there anyone else that I said I wouldn't call on audience participation. It's fully optional. I won't call on anyone. Is there anyone that would like to speak up of their own accord, and anything else you would put specifically for power assist into the evaluative process? Yes. That's my next slide. Moving on. Yes. Thank you for participating, though. Is there anything else about the physical essence of the physical exam? Yes. Yep. That's the second slide. Hang in there. You're doing great. Muscle tone. Excellent point. Excellent point. Beyond the strength is the muscle tone. Very good. Yep, definitely. Anyone else? Great audience participation. Thank you so much. So for the environment question, it's intended use. Where are you primarily going to be? I have a gentleman at the end. For time's sake, the video probably won't play, but it's not important. But the gentleman I just evaluated is 48 years old, MS. He has more overall weakness in his body than he does necessarily tone. But his intended use is that his wife is an ambulatory MS, works full-time. Their only time together is the weekends. And we were looking at him going from, and you'll see at the end, I'll show you just a picture since we're talking about him now, but he's in a scooter that was donated to him. It's never been necessarily provided him any postural support or any real means of still continuing to be very mobile, even within his home or out in the community. But his wife has to lift that scooter unit into its individual component parts, and we know what those weigh. And so we looked at a ultralight K5, moving the wheel forward. He's 5 feet, so his arms are short. He has all kinds of reasons for just that K5, but I introduced the power assist, and specifically I did borrow a Smartdrive to do that. And he came back to me ultimately, and he was struggling. Boy, I need that wristband. I was like, when I saw the wristband, I was ready to accost Mark and grab it off his wrist, because there were some fears of his trajectory balance, but also reaching for the buttons in time and getting back to the wheel. And obviously it was an initial assessment that was not an extended period of time. But that was a concern. But ultimately, and we'll talk about the end of the result later as to how he perceived it. But his intended use was obviously more community than home. And he is, yes, under Medicare. So we'll talk about that in a little while. Obstacles and thresholds. We didn't talk so much about that, Mark. Do you want to make a comment about going over different?
Yeah.
This just beeped at me and I don't
So
know.
I don't know if yeah, my mac's on, good. So fundamentally, these are essentially power chairs, but one of your biggest limitations in the environment is the size of the caster. So you still have these small little hard casters, and sidewalk cracks are brutal. So you're powering forward, whether it's with this one or this one, and you hit something without getting the casters up over the bump, and you're liable to just dish right out into the ground, and particularly at night when you can't see those cracks. So one of the things that I have to preach all the time is setup. So a reasonably tippy setup is ideal for power assist, which you got to have your limits because if you don't want to fall backwards. But the reason is because it takes weight off those front casters, so when it does unexpectedly hit a bump, it will go up and over it easier. So a well set up chair with power assist is much, much better than a poorly set up chair. So if it's very front heavy, in other words, the wheels are adjusted far to the back, then when you hit a bump, it's much more substantial. It'll slow you down, and it could throw you out. So that's probably the biggest.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's exactly what we needed to talk about. And so again, also the way that it activates or deactivates is going to be an issue when you're in a tighter space. We all know and saw Mark do the trajectory on a straightaway, and that's wonderful. What if you're dealing with in-home use, and that's where you're justifying that, depending on your payers. And I realize that we have people that are, non-Medicare, and we have people in different countries, but those are the things that, of course, we face is justifying that in-home maneuverability and how that technology is going to make that, a difference. And we sort of skirt that issue, I would think, and we'll hear from you on your justifications later, how some people are handling that. Is there anything else that somebody else would name on the environment? Yes?
Well, you want to expand the environment, the transportation,
Yes. It's a huge way, and that's what I thought about when I walked through the exhibit hall yesterday, even just in preparation for this, was to think about how that device, the separate one from SpinLife or Tailwind, the weight of the chair plus the unit, and how many component parts it can break down into. Sometimes people like to break down things less, but if it's the total weight. Yeah, driving it into the vehicle. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Anyone else? Yes. Do both systems require using it on a rigid frame?
No.
The answer is no.
No.
But I'll let Mark expand
neither
on it.
require that. So the pusher and base stuff does require some additional hardware on the chair itself, whether it's a folder or a rigid, and then likewise for the motion base, there's just some special hardware. So if it's a rigid chair, it's got like a little plastic clamp, and if it's a folding chair, it's got this little expandable spring-loaded bar, and that's fundamentally the difference. So no issues.
Great. Yes. The question was, how hard is it to remove that expandable bar for transportation purposes?
So for pusher and base, there is no bar. So the wheel's just attached to the two sides of the folding frame. So you just lift it up and fold it. And I don't have one here, but on this side, it's very straightforward. It's a lot like a one-arm drive, if you guys are familiar with that, but basically it's little spring-loaded little tips. And so it's actually, I call it like a toilet paper roll holder, because it's basically what it is. It's just a little spring-loaded rod that goes in between the axle tips, and basically you just take it off. It's really simple.
Okay. All right, let me go on for just a little bit, and then we'll take some more questions at the end. I promise we'll leave time for that. As far as a couple people mentioned cognition, and there's no doubt, especially depending if Mark was demonstrating with the buttons and having to get them in place, and a quick response and understanding, switching from driving level 1 to 2 indoor-outdoor modes, whatever system you're looking at, how many step commands or the memory or the patterning in order to pick up that is going to be really critical. So I'm not talking about cognition testing that needs to be put in the objective findings in your evaluation, but certainly having a subcategory of cognition and judgment and how they would be able to respond to that system is going to be pretty critical to that. I'm going to talk about, this is something that, and I can let you describe, if you'd like, just the beginning piece, not go into the questions, but just the idea of this. And I have repurposed it, or I'm going to repurpose it as part of this talk, and for moving forward in our evaluations. But you can just say why you developed it and what your thoughts were behind it.
So for the last year or so, when we sent out Smartdrives, we required everyone to perform a skills checklist to make sure that the client was educated and trained on how to use it, particularly because the model that it comes with has something called outdoor mode, and outdoor mode, you push to go, and it will not stop unless you tag one of these 2 buttons on the front, and it's got ridiculous amount of power, so you can find yourself in a lot of trouble, and so we wanted to make sure that everyone fully understood how it worked, and so in addition to the simple stuff like installing it and turning it off and on, learning how to switch between these 2 modes, but also being able to use it in figure 8s, starts and stops, just basic understanding of how it functions before you head out into the environment.
Perfect. So I tried to blow this up, and it may or may not be perfectly clear, but you can certainly see one of these skills checklists. But the idea of using those criteria not at the delivery checklist at the final end, but actually using it as part of your evaluation of the product. And sort of looking at, it's turning on and off, it's switching between the modes, it's while in indoor mode, push to go and stop using the button, push to go and stop using the hand rim, push to the slowest speed and stop, push slow to go on the outdoor mode, push slow to go, then push fast to go, fast, and then stop. And so you're getting the idea that they did not plug in the power source to this computer. Hold on a second, let me just find some wires and see. Mark, do you want to work on that?
Yep.
While I'm talking? Okay, it's always never ending. Okay, so I'll click that away, hopefully. We have 7%, so I'm going to all of you that know me, you know that I talk fast anyway. So we'll be finishing in the next 7 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so the idea is, though, that I believe that this should be part of the documentation process, that you looked at all of these skill sets, and I think that it helps with our case, knowing that this is the right piece of equipment. It gives you the confidence that you've gone through a good comprehensive assessment of the patient and see how that goes. So these words are not exclusive to me. I think they're becoming a little bit more in our talks at ISS and different conferences about defensible documentation. I know Liz and Laura do a talk about general documentation that includes that idea. And it is, we need to defend our clinical judgment in a way that we've never been challenged to do that before. I used to sign my name to a letter, and I gave my recommendations, and it was blessed. And now it's going back and finding each piece of objective data that supports my opinion, because my opinion doesn't really, right? Everybody's opinion doesn't really matter too much until you get to it. But describing how this device is going to work within that individual's to meet their functional mobility goals and being detailed and objective. So I pulled up a couple different ways to look at this. I think Mark's checklist is for a specific purpose at a delivery, and so it gave us an idea of some basic things to evaluate. But I looked at the wheelchair skills training that was developed by Lee Kirby, and this talk was delivered by Cher Smith, and they're out of Nova Scotia in Canada. They speak often at ISS. I don't believe that they're here this time, but they'll probably be in Vancouver next year. And so they have a whole wheelchair skills program, and they have it's a wonderful website. It is wheelchairskillsprogram.ca. That's as simple as it is. And that website has not just for power assist, but for any power and manual wheelchair skills sort of checklist, if you will. So they've based it on both assessment and training for both wheelchair users and caregivers, both power and manual chairs, the process and sequencing used in order to learn the skills to become an efficient and wonderful user of this technology. It's updated often, and it's free. You can go to it and just download those materials. Feel free to use them. You can upload them as an e-doc and put them into your file that you ran the patient through some of these skill sets. And so, yeah, it's a wonderful way to look at back our decisions up on objective documentation. So the things, just as an example, if you look at this on the manual wheelchair, that doesn't do very well up here. So, you can see for yourself. The individual skill for manual wheelchair is for the wheelchair user, WCU, and for the caregiver is CG, not contact guard, for all of you therapists out there. Get out of your own heads for a minute. But turn the controller on and off, controls positioning options. They can roll forward 10 meters, turning 90 degrees while moving forward. So we're starting to see a little bit more. And if you get into the detail, which of course I'm going to read you a few, and then you can look this up on your own, or if you're on a computer right now. But so the rolling forward 10 meters, rolling backwards, turning 90 degrees, turning 180 degrees in place, maneuvers actually sideways or gets through a hinged door. Now these are not power assist test, it's a manual wheelchair skills, but that unit is a part of the manual chair now. Gets through hinged doors, reaches for an object that's above them, looking at dynamic balance, picks objects up off the floor, relieves weight from their buttocks. It has a whole bunch of skills, but some of them have a lot more to do with avoids moving obstacles, ascending inclines, etc. And so, I tried to make it bigger so you could see. How did I do? From the back of the room, better? So you get an idea of that list, and then you're actually able to score it and be able to record that. Now, I've gone back to clinical practice 4 weeks ago as an outpatient Part B in the home therapist. And I'm lucky, I'll be able to do wheelchair assessments, technology evals in the home, as well as regular therapy, which is wonderful. And I have now been introduced to the world of, after 24 years, the DPT, WebPT version of documentation. And if you don't use an evidence-based, very specific objective test as part of your evaluation, it does not let you close the file. So you can say that you're going to stop working for the day, but if you can't, you have to pull up certain evidence-based appropriate testing. And I think that it's going to be imperative that we begin, and I'm going to begin looking at what should be loaded specific to wheelchair assessments, because what I found in the last 4 weeks, and I've already done 4 or 5 evaluations, is that there isn't something necessarily that's evidence-based that's on that list of accepted testing. And Teresa's she's shaking her head, and I can see it's very difficult. So I've looked at Mark's, the University of Pittsburgh's functional mobility assessment, but it's not in there. I've looked at some basic sitting and dynamics balance tests that might be applicable, but a lot of the times they talk about the hemiplegic side only versus the normal side. Okay, so you've had this experience. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Teresa, about what you found, or are you shaking your head and just being with me? You're being with me. Thank you. I appreciate that. So it's something that we are going to have to work on as a collective group here to find ways to begin putting in those evidence-based tests that will be accepted. So right now, I'm still doing the regular range of motion, tone, strength, coordination, fine motor, that's all wonderful, but the question is gonna be, when are we gonna get questioned about, now that's just for coverage of paying for the therapy. The question is, when is that gonna become the criteria for approval or disapproval? What did you do to make the determination that this is in fact better than a power chair for someone if we're looking at power assist? Or what happened within, using a K5 and then needing to try to add the power assist? So it's going to be really interesting, but this does have a scoring. So I am going to be looking at this specifically as a potential because it is evidence-based, and we may be able to put it into the system and start using it. But it does score with a passing score or pass with difficulty, failing, and it talks about independently and safely accomplishing without any difficulties, or a score of a 1 might be evaluation criteria met, but the subject experienced some difficulty worthy of noting. The task is, incomplete or unsafe. So obviously we want to prove that this is necessary, but we may need to put in more than just strength and range of motion. So I challenge us to start thinking about what other evidence and things like that we can use. So when we look at, we know that we need to, first, before we start going into anything, we know what the ultra lightweight manual wheelchair criteria are. This is not for you to read, this is just to list and say. The idea is to first make sure the patient meets those criteria. It looks like this: a full-time manual wheelchair user. The beneficiary must require individualized fitting and adjustment using the axle configuration, like Mark talked about, moving the wheels forward, the proper fit, seat and back angles that can't be accommodated with the K1 through 4. And that's, I apologize for the international crowd. That is most of our world right now. How many people are outside the US? Okay, so for those, I apologize. Our criteria, I can speak for my area that, for instance, Aetna Healthcare and Blue Cross, our third-party insurers, have actually written into their policy statements almost verbatim the Medicare policy for Power Assist. And so I think that unfortunately in this country, we need to continue to understand those policies and their criteria, not only for just for the qualification of the equipment is going to become our issue. So we go back to that as a reminder to say, you know, are they a full-time user? What are those specific criteria of the K5 first? And then we'll continue to move on. So I picked up the Medicare policy for Power Assist technology in the policy manual of Medicare, and it takes you through the first part of, you know, what is the MRADLs that are being limited. Okay, that's obvious. Beneficiary's mobility limitation cannot be sufficiently and safely resolved by the use of an appropriate fitted cane and walker. And then the beneficiary does not have sufficient upper extremity function to self-propel an optimally configured manual wheelchair in the home? Are there limitations of strength and endurance, range of motion, coordination, the presence of pain, or the deformity or absence or one of both extremities? And I think the person who said muscle tone, thank you, because I think that's critical. You can have the strength but not able to individualize that joint range of motion for anything that's a meaningful propulsion stroke or anything that's even a safe propulsion stroke. And the beneficiary has been self-propelling in a manual chair for at least 1 year. Now, I don't think that 1 year should be an intimidating type of a thing, because I think most of the people that we see that are looking at Power Assist or making a manual to power transition are already in that situation. So that's not, I think, enough to say they've had pain, it's been a year, sign me up for Power Assist. I don't think that's where we're going to get success with proving the efficacy of this technology versus, well, if you need that, then you need a power chair. Because the power chair, like Teresa said, environmentally, and I think all of us agree, that's not necessarily going to work. I talked to a therapist yesterday, a colleague of mine from Philly, who said the individual had to go to, is Linda here? Linda, are you in this room? Okay. That he had to go to appeals with a picture of his stairs. Literally, that the power chair was an inappropriate recommendation of equipment, but the Power Assist would have a tremendous difference on his outcome. And so finally, she was able to appeal that. Those are some of the things that we look at. When we look at the documentation in general, we know, I don't want to be simplistic, but I've made, like Sharon Pratt said earlier, you only learn from your mistakes and you only share what you've learned. I've done the C4 quad, didn't say non-ambulatory because I thought it was obvious. I don't know, but that's not actually, there is actually a situation that I know of where I do have a friend's father who is a quad who actually is partially ambulatory. He doesn't have any sensory, but he has motor, and so it could be, or is that like one out of, the amount of people that were going to win the lottery when it was $500 million? Yes, 1 out of 167 million chances of winning, but that one would have been denied if I hadn't made that clear. So 60% of the denials in general, I'm sure if some of you have been to some of the documentation sessions, and I'm doing another one that's just purely on that this afternoon, are because it's vague or general descriptions, or being too weak to ambulate is not enough, or too weak to propel the K5 is not going to be the strong objective language that we need, or not listing the lesser devices. So if you look at that, it's always document why the beneficiary's mobility needs cannot be met with, yes, an optimally configured manual chair, but also going all the way back on every single case to non-ambulatory with or without a cane, a walker, why that's not appropriate, why the power-operated vehicle. But most of the time that I hear, and you can all nod or tell me later, is mostly that when you go for the power assist, they say, well, we might as well just invest in a power chair now. Why spend the extra dollars on the power assist? We'll just get you the power chair now. Well, that's because that's not what meets their functional mobility needs right now. But having to go through that algorithm in your head or in your letter, whether it's typed into part of your own assessment forms or it's computerized documentation, however you want to handle that, it really needs to be done on every individual. So to get some ideas, and we're going to have a discussion in a minute, but I'm doing the session this afternoon, and I'm not somebody who really advertises things, so that's not why I'm saying it, but the words that we used were paint the picture. Describe in writing someone that can, like a good novel that you can read and almost see yourself on the beach in the breeze, where it's 80 and not 1. Wait, hold on a second. Wait, I can almost kind of feel that. But you have to paint the picture as if you're not there and be able to understand what's happening with that individual's functional mobility, and then focus on that objective data. So again, the pain scale is going to be important. Finding one of those wheelchair skills tests might be something to at least add so that you went through that evaluative process, and then adding the details on strength and range and tone and coordination and fine motor, et cetera, just to make sure you made it a full exam. Yes?
I always have a patient goal consistent with the goal in the evaluation. So if my patient has a goal to be more independent on multiple surfaces, elevations, etc., and to be able to continue to work without pain, I have the patient goal consistent with the goal for assisted propulsion.
Right.
And patient preference. The patient's
Yes.
preference is not to obtain
Power mobility, absolutely. That question is also, I'm glad you said that, because that is part of that Medicare algorithm, is the patient, have a commitment to using this type of technology, and I think that is a great point that you just made. Excellent. I think we're almost through the rest of the slides, so I'll do that, and then we'll open up for questions, and we'll have a discussion. I think we said just now, again, just pain alone is not enough objective data. I think we've determined that we need to find some kind of more of an objective, evidence-based types of surveys and ways that we can support this. This was a picture of just Joe. The video is not going to run because I didn't take the time to load it. I didn't want to get started late. It's not imperative. It was him giving a try, and Mark has shown you the technology, so it's not important. But he's just in an old basic scooter trying to get around. But the minute I put him into a K5 that was configured with rehab seating and a supportive back. It did have more, I did put a curved back around him with some mild lateral support, and he really felt more controlled and balanced and willing to actually go into the Smartdrive mode, even just indoors, just feeling as if he was going to be too unstable. So I implore you that when you have the sample, to make sure that you at least get the seating and make sure that they feel that postural stability so that they have a good chance to put something into the push. It won't be a tremendous amount on something like the Smartdrive, but it could be on the eMotion and the rim activated systems, where there's going to be a lot of displacement outside their base of support that may make them feel quite uncomfortable. So to give them a good chance, I would transition that. And so it's not going to run, so I won't show it to you, but there was just incredibly an upright posture, a place where he felt much more secure and comfortable for that trial. So I'll skip that. This is not the limit on, Mark, I don't know if on your website you have more articles available to people, or that's something that you're thinking about doing, but because sometimes it is helpful to include a reference and that this technology, is viable. So there's a couple that we use to put this together, but there are certainly much more, and you can talk to me about that afterwards if you'd like. So that is sort of where, we went with this talk, and I'll let you all go through some questions or let's just share a little bit more in detail about the documentation and what's been working and what's not. So thank you for at least listening to the lecture portion. Now let's have a good discussion, I hope. And I'll try to repeat every question. If I missed one, please tell me and I didn't say it and repeat it. Yes?
Okay, I'll play devil's advocate.
Okay, good.
I'm a physical therapist that does the evaluations, and then on the part-time, I am also a reviewer for our state Medicaid.
Excellent. What state are you in?
Sweet Home, Alabama.
Sweet Home, Alabama. One of my favorite songs.
So we also have to go by this Medicare guidelines.
Okay.
Well, the Medicare guidelines for the kind of in-the-home functional stuff. So when I look at the cost of a manual wheelchair with the
Do you want to
power
use
assist
yours and go over
on it,
and
it
stand with her?
retails for nearly $10,000.
Hold on 1 second. We're going to use Mark's lapel to let you speak to the whole group, so the whole group can hear.
Okay. Good morning. So as a reviewer, when I look at the justification that comes, I do not know the patient, do not know what's going on.
Okay?
This is Wendy. She said stay standing. I look at the retail pricing of a K5 manual wheelchair back cushion with the $6,500 to $7,000 power assist to it, total retailing $10,000 that they're asking for one of the poorest states in the country to pay for, side by side with the retail of a basic power wheelchair that has a narrower base. Home accessibility should be met even better since we tuck the wheels under, the overall width is better for about $6,000. So it's hard for us to go back to our state and say we should pay for power assist when the only justifications that the therapists are sending us are transportation. That it is easier to transport, they don't have to buy a van, they can put it in the trunk of a car, which I totally see. I'm a therapist, I'm on your side, right? Which we are fortunate in Alabama, we have 3 reviewers that are PTs that do this full time. So we get it, but we have to go back to the governor and say, how do I justify $4,000 extra when if that person had it, then they could put a lift on the vehicle. So I'm in a quandary as a therapist of how do I go back and give the good functional justification for these power assist devices when they are so expensive. So there you have it. Anybody got help for me as a reviewer and a therapist?
Is there anybody in the audience who would like to respond to that? Is it a response? Let's stick to that for a minute.
I'm from the neighboring state, Tennessee. I think the world is not accessible. And when you talk about the number of manual wheelchair users that actually have to transfer out of their chair and crawl to the bathroom, etc., I think you can use accessibility in part for the documentation because many manual wheelchair users still access the community to provide appropriate supervision for their children, to attend school functions, to attend college. Some are gainfully employed even with the Medicare requirement that they can't make too much. So the world is not ADA, and so I think you can use accessibility in that sometimes people have to have help with a push, and they can push a manual chair a whole lot easier than you can push a 300-pound power chair. So I would use the fact that the world is not ADA and there may be specific to that individual areas where they can more likely access the environment in the community to meet the duties and responsibilities for their variety of roles: parent, spouse, employee, volunteer.
My response to that, though, is an 18-wide
Mark,
chair with 8 inches outside,
can you walk it back up to her, please?
narrower power chair. That's my struggle.
Thank you.
Is that we go on that the power chair is narrower because the wheels are tucked under, typically. So accessibility is still my struggle as a reviewer, even though I hear you outside the parenting and the community activities, but our state says we got to stay within the home. So I need a strong justification to educate my home therapist on it. If we can have this, then we can pursue the power assist.
But even Medicare says with a K5 that there has to be some community use. So I think using
Well,
Pit- pit it against them, in what I'm saying.
Okay, let's be clear, because, uh-oh. Well, you can't say hi right now in the middle of the discussion.
I have a comment. Well, because she's in, Alabama, we're in Chicago. It's a little harder for us because our patients who are Medicaid patients, right, have better access to public transportation, to getting to and from doctor's appointments and things like that. So the transportation issue is a little bit more difficult for us to say, well, they can't fit it in their car. Well, a lot of people have access to, bus transport and things like that. What about in more rural areas, accessibility to public transport that would be available to them to get to and from, like, doctor's appointments and things like that? Are they reliant on family members, friends, to get to those appointments, and they don't have the ability, to get on a bus?
Yeah,
or,
I agree. It isn't just the family. I mean, you have to look at the caregiving unit of who's caring for that patient that day or getting them to those appointments. I have patients who are taken to appointments by RNs or care managers that are part of the team for someone that's living at home, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to get, how else are they going to get to those appointments if
right, and I
it's
think
somebody
that gets
different?
more difficult in suburban and certainly rural environments where there's not that public transport access. So
Agreed.
That's been one way that we've said, okay, power's, not going to work.
I want to take a step for just 1 second and make a correction. Give me 1 second. Don't go away. But the correction for the community use with the Medicare, when I was doing reviews for NSM and specifically looking at Medicare, the policy actually says full-time wheelchair use, but it at one point actually had the word community in it, and it does not. I know that sounds insane, because really, if it's just in-home use, why they would say that on the K-5 policy, not specifically for the power system, but just for the K-5 alone. So that was retracted in one part of the policy manual, that filled up my computer drive, but it is full-time use. It is not community-based. I just want to be clear about that. We're still in the home need to justify that, and I think we all know that, but just to be clear. Good. You wanted to respond, and then we're going to move on to some other comments. Did you want to make a response?
Well, the transportation issue, and it's not specific to our state Medicaid about the whole in-the-home yet, but we still have to battle, where does the state draw the line on providing transportation? Because as soon as we say, okay, we'll do this for transportation, I'll have 4 million requests for a $6,500 device, when for $6,500 you can get a pretty decent lift, car, whatever to your vehicle. So where does a state draw the line on provision of these things?
Can I ask you a question? Let me reverse it just for devil's advocate, and then we're going to move on. But here's the question for you. As a reviewer, and you're receiving the request, what is it that you find that you have approved Power Assist?
I have not.
You have not approved. Okay. So
I can't.
are there some
find
other
it yet from
there's some other comments. Could you walk the microphone to the back? There's a gentleman back on the left. I'd like to get some other comments for some other different states and different payers so that we can begin to learn from that justification how we can begin to apply this.
Hi, I'm from a dealer in St. Louis, so not a therapist, but the clients that I would use for a Power Assist system wouldn't be appropriate for a Group 2 chair. You'd really be looking at a Group 3 chair, and maybe not necessarily power seating, but probably a rehab back of some sort, a specialty seat cushion of some sort. And if you're just looking at a dollars-to-dollars comparison of a K-5 with an ultralight system, or with a K-5 with a Power Assist system compared to a power chair, that client probably has the diagnosis that supports the need for a Group 3 chair and has the need for specialty seating. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I agree. I think that's an important point, because again, we were just talking about whether something is point A to point B, and whether that power chair is at a certain level that is only going to meet that patient's need to move from point A to point B, but not to live in the chair with the seating or adding powered seating, those other expenses. So yes, I think it's a good point just for the discussion to say, okay, Power Assist is equal to what level of power chair? And is it fair to say, what are the other ways that they're going to function in that manual chair that are different than the power chair? Was there another hand up? There's two in the middle back, sort of. Wait for the microphone. My short-term memory is too short to be able to repeat the whole question and get it right, so.
Lois, I'm an ATP out of Florida, South Florida,
Great.
and Southwest Florida, and I agree that was very well said. I wanted to make sure that if the reviewer is looking at an apples-to-apples comparison, not apples to oranges, the criteria for the power assist probably really needs to fall in line with Group 3 considerations, as previously said. And we probably need to do something to help differentiate our clients a little bit better so that we can take a leadership position there to help the reviewers understand that we're not looking to put people into Group 2. So the same criteria that they're looking for in the separate benefit carve-out, including Group 2 with a single power tilt maybe, forward, are the same criteria that, and Group 3, that kind of criteria should be used to help them, because as a reviewer, if you look at the single power Group 2 and forward, you're never going to find a power system that's less than $10,000 for the power system alone. So therefore, a better comparison could be done.
Thank you. I think we might be looking at a RESNA position paper on power assist soon. I hate to say that because it's frightening, but who wants to be on the committee? There was another comment behind. Yes, one here on the side. Teresa.
This is a little different. It's not really about the coding
That's okay.
or whatever. But what I would say is what I've learned is that it's just as valuable. It's probably more valuable to have a trial run of the item in the environment that they are going to be using it.
Yep.
Because to me, that's where the liability can come into play, that I can have them tested out in my clinic in a very controlled situation.
Yes, good point.
But, you know, it's like going up their own van's ramp,
Yep.
you know, or coming out of it. What is their safety? What is it at their work site or their school site?
That's right.
And then that becomes a technical difficulty because I can't go out into their home, you know, being an inpatient therapist.
Right.
So that's where I've used my vendor as the extender and have requested that they videotape
Yes. Excellent.
the test, and then I followed up with a phone call to the patient or bring them back in, you know, and finalize the decision making by reviewing the
Excellent.
videotaping, you know, and I
Yep.
can document that,
Yes.
you know, as well. So
Excellent.
I think that's just a huge area that
That's a-
gets missed.
No, that's a
and is
great
very
point.
important.
You also just brought me to another comment I wanted to make, and what you made me think of was I've actually used Ron Boninger in his website for the Smart Wheel, has some data in there about at least propulsion of 30 meters or 30 feet, and counting strokes and timing how long it takes someone to do that distance, and then in comparison, obviously with the power assist, but showing the differences from either a lower level chair to justify the K5, I've done it, and then now with the K5, probably having to look at that as just some kind of another functional skills test to be able to justify that ability to say this is going to make a tremendous difference. And certainly the shoulder injuries or the repetitive strains, all those things are going to come into play, but that doesn't help us with our power technology issue that we're still fighting. I think that the appropriateness of that equipment can fit very well into someone's lifestyle. I think we have to keep showing, this is the point where if we don't show the efficacy of that technology, we begin to give, no offense to you personally at all, don't even know you, but we continue to have to put our practice on the funders, and we all know that that is a dangerous place to go because we know that the technology has value, we know that the clinical application to that particular patient has value, and then we allow that to sort of drive us in a whole different direction that isn't a good clinical decision. So these are no easy answers here. I'm sorry if you came for some, but let me just check the time, and I'm sure someone will flag me. We have a couple more minutes? Okay, go ahead. There's another question right here. Is there a microphone? Did you have a comment, sir? You did, okay.
So I would love to ask the governor of Alabama what he thinks about lower extremity prosthetics, which are incredibly expensive, but really, if a person had a K1 standard wheelchair, they would have access to their home. if they had an above knee amputation. I think that we get hung up in this cost thing. I'd also like to ask the question, if coverage criteria for a power chair is willingness to utilize the equipment, can we document that the patient is unwilling to utilize a power chair? Because if they are, well, maybe if transporting their device is so important and they don't have the funds to buy a lift and the state isn't going to buy a lift, well, then to me, their only other option is getting a scooter, which has so many detrimental problems. And because maybe they could load a scooter, maybe they could. And so for me, I think that we're missing out on the big picture. I think that I'd be really curious to know if we could just document an unwillingness to utilize the piece of equipment, which is part of the coverage criteria, that they have to be willing to utilize the device.
So just the question for this lady right here, would that influence your decision? Right.
But I still have to go back with the dollars.
Right.
The financial part.
Yep.
I would challenge the makers of these devices. Why so expensive?
All right, let's not, okay, time out. Clinical session, clinical session. There's a comment right behind you. Would you hand the lady that microphone right there, please? And then I saw your hand over there, so hang on.
You're right here. I don't need the microphone, but
No, you do need the microphone.
I actually
if you're going to
do.
share with the whole crowd.
I'm just curious, I've never been denied this, but, you have so many of those folks that are on the border between power and manual. They're spiritually not ready to make that shift, but I'll always write in my note as a therapist that this person refuses power, but functionally and diagnostically, that's where they are. Because I want them to know there's further documentation coming down the road. This is the beginning of my documentation path for them. And I always say they are refusing what I think is where they should be, and I am following their refusal, that type of thing. But I also think that at the clinicians thing this morning, we talked about legislation. Everybody needs to know and be behind Medicare getting rid of the in-home use, because when loading a chair in your car becomes an activity of daily living, we should all have a big freaking party, you know what I mean? Or going up and down your entrance ramp. I mean,
Well
some
said.
of these things really need to be part of what we can tell our payers, that we need to be able to do this, or people need to be able to do this. But I always write functionally and diagnostically. They're here, but they refuse it, so their will outweighs my clinical decision making.
Look, I'm raising my own hand. I think I might get to talk first before, but I raise my hand. Could somebody call on me? I gotta have a little fun up here. So I have a comment that I'm gonna make, and that is related exactly to if you can't go, like you heard that Don Clayback and the NCART and the NARTS conference, the CRT conference, is April 21st to 23rd in Washington, D.C. If there were some, even if I have to borrow a Power Assist client from Philadelphia and drive them all the way down and go to the Alabama appointments, that's what I will do. You meet me there. Okay, that's what I think we might actually need to do, because I think that just like everything else in our past, nobody knew what tilt was, and they were like, why do you need that? You need a seat elevator? Why do you need to be at eye level with someone? Or, oh God, I have so many patients in the last 4 weeks since going back to clinical care. I'm like, oh God, I can't get them from here to there. So everything that's been designed and developed by these, as much as we want to go back and say, why do you charge so much? The other thing is, you're developing technologies that are fitting a niche that were not considered before, and we went from tilt to recline and tilt and recline, and then we added power elevating legs, and then we added this. And so we're on the right trajectory. I think that we need to stay positive when we walk out of this room today, because I have had clinicians come to me in Philadelphia. They have written excellent documentation. They have had Medicare pay. They have had Blue Crosses and Aetna's pay. And they are some tough, if you've ever been to Philadelphia, there's the Liberty Bell, and then you could, stand on a bridge and jump off to try to get something paid for, because Philly's one of the most difficult places, and I'm sure all of you face that, so I'm not trying to be special. But we live in a hard documentation place, and we fight the fight, and I think we need to continue to do that. So there was another last comment. How much time do we have? 5 minutes. Oh, my goodness.
I'm going to make this quick. This is kind of a case study. Last February, I had my wrist fused. I've been in this manual chair for 25 years. I got a power assist and I got a power chair. I have connections get me a power chair at my house. I could not function in my house with a power chair. Because in my house, it's totally accessible, 3-foot doors, 4-foot hallways,
Inaccessible or accessible?
accessible.
Accessible.
I built it 20 years ago, it's totally accessible, but I could not function because the power chair put me in a whole different world. But I could keep my same manual chair, and with the power assist, I functioned perfectly.
Can you be more specific about how that was difficult for you in the power chair versus the
Because
power
for one,
assist?
I cannot drive a joystick. I mean, maybe I could learn, but I was tearing up my house, my doors, because it's just the way, what I've been doing for 25 years, and now you're asking me to, put the joystick this way and go this way and that, and I couldn't do it. I mean, I could do it out on the roads, but not inside my house. I could not function in my house with that.
Yeah, and I think it's important because the comment by the lady next to, we're doing ESP stuff, so don't worry. But the length of the chair and the maneuverability is not just the width of the chair. It is how long does that chair need to be to have tilt or recline or the power positioning, and the length of the chair and that swing, whether it's front, mid, rear, all those things are going to affect that maneuverability. So we're back to Medicare in the home that's driving other policy, and I think that might be another really strong documentation comment to put in there. Great. Who was next? There was somebody else that way? Yep.
Yeah, good morning. I'm an ATP from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we deal a lot in rural areas, so this is kind of for our young lady from Alabama. One of the things that I'm sitting there thinking about, I know the cost is a major factor with you, but if you put somebody in a power chair that they can't transport, because so many of our folks live in the rural areas, they have multiple modes of getting to a doctor's appointment, whether it be grandma one day, brother, sister, whatever, different vehicles. So a power chair being so big and bulky probably isn't the most accessible idea necessarily for everybody. The other thing that I sit there and think about versus cost is, because if they get that power chair and they can use it in their home, but they can't access doctor's appointments and so on, then you've got an expenditure being wasted because now you spent this money saving a few bucks, but they're not using it, so it's not really an effective mode of mobility for them. And then the mental health aspect of it, if they have something they can't use, how much cost is going into that person's depression and diminishing health aspect from that standpoint? Just thoughts.
If we could use the microphone, that would be great. Who's next? Yes, the gentleman in the middle with your hand up. The microphone is better if possible. It makes less noise. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring up another point in the state of Florida, a neighboring state. There is cost of transportation for clients that is paid for by the state to go to therapy and doctor appointments that could possibly be not having to be paid for if a piece of equipment was transportable by the individual versus not. And that is certainly a significant cost factor in the general healthcare cost of that individual. So that would certainly be a cost determining factor in looking at their overall health costs.
Right.
A
total cost analysis.
Correct. And
Yep.
Is that something that's paid for in the state of Alabama by the state? Right, to PT.
Can you repeat her answer, please? I couldn't hear you.
I think it was that Alabama does pay for certain circumstances for transportation. Is that correct? So what is the cost of that? How many doctor's appointments or therapy appointments or other significant appointments are paid for by the state for that individual over a 5-year period of time?
Right, very good point, and unfortunately, that is where we're going to have to end. But I really appreciate the participation. I think to learn from each other has been a tremendous opportunity this morning, so thank you so much for that.